Hey, this is Frank. You're listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. Do you ever feel like you have friends who sometimes just don't get each other? This is a podcast that I recorded with two of my friends, Jake and Noah. We find out the hard ways we struggle to communicate better and sometimes succeed, but sometimes not. For years, the three of us have talked about communication and how it's sometimes easier said than done. Even when we're trying to be understanding, our well-meaning intentions often get lost in translation. We decided to share these conversations with the world. Join us as we find out what happens when three friends try to learn how to really talk to each other.
Is this a continuing podcast?
No, what you need to do here is take what he gave you and close the podcast with it.
Yeah, do you think you can do that?
We'll pass this around until somebody actually closes.
All right, deal.
You want to play that clip one more time so people understand that we're learning and trying to be better?
I'm pretty
Try to
sure.
remember the clip.
I'm pretty sure one of us is supposed to say, "You've been listening." The other one says, "2."
Well, can I address what you asked me?
No, I'm going to cut you off.
You've been listening to the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. Thanks for listening.
I did want you to respond. I was lying to you.
You did want me to respond.
I want
Okay.
to hear.
Were you
what had to
lying
say.
for novelty?
Yeah, I think so.
It's just how
Actually, I think it
tends
was
to you.
comedy, but novelty is probably an aspect of
Novelty's
comedy.
just comedy. Comedy is just novelty. How many types of comedy are there?
Would you like a Venn diagram? I don't actually know which one is the big circle.
If anyone made it this far, they're now starting to be entertained.
What if both are the big circle and both are the small circle? Ain't that just the universe for you?
Did you want to respond to him though?
I kind of did.
You're listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. In these episodes, we're learning. We don't know what we're doing yet, and sometimes it shows. We think there's beauty in being a beginner, and we're learning from them, so we publish them. So thanks for listening, and rest assured that there will be better Unbecoming Platypus podcasts ahead.
When we create art, we are just expressing for the sake of expression. And the result is the universe knows a little bit more about itself, sees the world through another set of eyes. When we create for the purpose of helping other people, it feels a little bit different to me. There's intent behind it. There's direction behind it. There's confidence behind it.
There's something about just being like authentically frank, and this seems to help people more than intent or something. Also, there's like this idea that you say the same thing 100 different ways because other people will hear it differently, or the 100th time might click or something. So I've had that happen to me where I'm like, someone in my life tells me the same thing for the 100th time, and I'm like, oh, I totally get it now, you know?
For sure.
So some of those like more intentional creations seem to just be rephrasings of authenticity. I think it's something, I've heard people talk about it as a confessional, as prayer, even social sharing, as just general community. So, I mean, it's not that I've never written anything that I thought would help other people, but I don't think I have a lot of like thought about the matrix of whether it's art or intent to help.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sharing what's on my mind.
Well, the value system that I alluded to last time, that I don't like this sort of judgments that come out of it, but it's this idea that like authenticity is something you can smell it. Like it's so present when it's there. At least for me, like I have this incredible like, oh, that just feels disingenuous. I even if what they're saying is true, it feels formulated, and a part of it is now a product. It's a commodity, and I just don't want a part of that. It doesn't feel like connection. And it's this whole idea of like consistency versus authenticity for me. It makes me wonder if like vulnerability has something to do with this. I was thinking about like, and you know, I've never read any research on this, but I think about like mirror neurons and how a baby is born and it watches a parent smile and it smiles back at them. And we all think, oh, it's just so happy. It just loves me. Right. Well, maybe there's a certain mirroring aspect to vulnerability. When I hear a person just expressing themselves and saying, this was hard, I came out of it, whatever it is, something in me mirrors that. And it says, if they can let their guard down, be vulnerable, and grow through this, so can I. And that to me is different than here are the 3 steps to becoming better and that sort of thing.
Sure.
It's a morning routine, I think. It's always a morning routine.
Yeah. Well, if you don't do the cold shower and 2 hours of sun exposure directly in your eyes at 30 degrees, then
you're
never going to get wealthy.
I mean, that's the summit of being right there.
Yes.
Being cold.
And then warm.
And not being able to see. Staring at the sun.
They say don't do that, but you got to get it right in those eyeballs.
Yeah. Get it in your eyeballs without looking at it. That's the trick.
Right. I think the body does that naturally if you're just, where the sun is.
I am curious about something related to you. Do you ever create something for creativity's sake? I mean, we don't talk about creativity that often. Do you do create? I mean, everybody I think does creative things, but do you do things purposely for creativity regularly?
Yeah. Do you use MyFitnessPal?
I mean, I have, yeah, but not regularly.
You use some of my code when you're on that website. Unless you got rid of it.
I have in the past, yeah.
Yeah. That was just for creativity.
Okay.
That's the most obvious example.
That wasn't utility? Not that they can't be both. I'm just curious.
No, it was utility for sure, but I wasn't. It was just like a little. I'm like, I wonder if I can do this. Sometimes just for creativity, for sure. A lot more recently.
Just curious because you made a statement a little bit ago about that you don't do things for the sake of creativity or with intention creatively a lot of the time or something like that.
Yeah, I think I was trying to allude to that. I don't do things with a sort of marketing intentionality because I do just I'm usually just writing down whatever creatively happened in my mind.
Gotcha.
So almost constantly, I mean, creativity is probably my largest strength. Almost constantly, I'm creating things with ideas in my head. But
sure.
Sharing them is new. Like that, I'm sort of going through a mythological renaissance on.
That makes sense.
I've never really thought about the overlap between like creativity and utility before, but I would say my greatest creative expression is songwriting. I almost never do it. It's usually in cycles. I'll go through like a 2-month period where it's a lot of songwriting and recording and stuff. And it's almost always when I have something like emotional to process. Like songwriting for me is a framework. It's like, okay, you're going to need a verse here. You might want a bridge in this song. You might want a chorus, right? And so it forces you to say, there are some gaps here. It's like a Mad Lib. And I want you to fill in these gaps. What are you feeling here? What's the journey that you go through? What's the revelation here? And so it's very, very utilitarian in that way that it helps me process these things. But at the same time, I'm putting thought into it and everything like that, but I'm also in that creative flow. I'm also feel more like a vehicle for that to flow through than the one who's actually making something. And that's what, a lot of people talk about with creativity is that flow state. Like I'm just letting it happen,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot differently about creativity these days than I used to. I used to think that in a lot of ways, I thought I wasn't creative. And now I see sort of what Frank was saying is that I'm constantly creating. I just didn't see it as creativity. And so I see it in things like at work, coming up with solutions to problems. And, I've been doing this my entire life, but I just didn't see it as creativity. So I think that's an area of growth over the last, 5 or 6 years for me has been realizing that I am coming up with creative solutions constantly. And just because I never saw it as creativity doesn't mean it wasn't that.
Just doing what you think is cool, man. Being it. I like what you said too, though. Like, I've always been, somewhat musical. I'm usually just a guitar player. I don't like the sound of my own voice, but I do sing. And, any of the bands that I've been in, it's like, okay, well, let me kind of be in the background. Recently, over the last, year and a half or so, I wanted to start sharing more, wanted to start getting out and making connections. So I started doing these open mic nights, and I would go out and primarily play covers of other people's music. And let me tell you, there is a giant difference between me playing a Josh Ritter song 1 second and just being like, yeah, if I fuck it up, I do, whatever. And the next moment being like, I'm about to reveal like the shattered pieces of my soul in front of people. They might not know the difference, but these are two very different things for me when I sing someone else's song versus my own.
Sure.
I want to touch on something else you said, which was being in the background. That's something that I see very differently too, is that we were talking about being in a band yesterday, just wanting to play music again. And it's very easy to look at a band, for instance, and see the lead singer, lead guitarist or something like that. And that's the focal piece. But I've never seen music that way. I'm always picking out the different pieces. Well, I think on this podcast, I said something about how I probably seem to others at concerts because I'm not outwardly energetic about it, but I'm very in my head about this guitar riff or this rhythm that the drummer's playing or the bass line or whatever, right? And I've always seen music in that way, where it is this cohesive thing. There is no background. And so I don't really know what my point is, other than maybe shedding light on the fact that maybe you're not in the background in those areas.
Yeah, it's all part of the same thing, right? The silence is as much a part of the music. Without the space between the notes would not be anything at all.
Well, right, but even your notes, if you stopped playing, if you just didn't play, then that piece is different.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the last episode, we were kind of talking about how Frank, I don't want to misquote you here, but you kind of said something like, doing the thing as opposed to thinking about doing the thing it represents a lot of freedom for you, and for me, the thinking about the thing actually is sort of like a bridge to doing the thing. I reference that as a difference in like Enneagram types or relative starting positions. You start from this analytical place. I start from a different place and move toward the analytics. But what idea were you getting across there? I'll give you an opportunity to represent yourself truthfully.
Oh, just that having been through a lot of reference material to try to come up with a worldview that I was okay with over the last couple of decades or whatever, my actual conclusion is that each individual should just do the next thing they think is cool, which for you involves analysis, and for me involves something more like physical action in the world. And for someone else may involve really spending a lot of time with emotionality or whatever. I don't know. But the best thing I think a human can do is look inside of themselves and find out what they think is cool and pursue it. And one of the ways you can do this is through the Enneagram.
Well, it kind of stuck out to me a little bit as well, because like, Noah, you're an 8. Frank, you're a 5. I'm a 7. And
is he telling us what numbers we are?
You're not supposed, like, one of the core tenets of the Enneagram is that you never type someone else.
I apologize. I'm so sorry.
Just tell us about your type.
I'm a 7.
Thank you.
Which is different potentially than Noah's type. I won't get into that yet. But you were talking about like the way that you experience a concert, right? And that people kind of misunderstand this. And you're experiencing it very much like, I don't know, to me, it sounded like analysis. Maybe it's different than analysis in some way. But like for me, if I'm paying attention to those things, I'm kind of losing what I would experience as like the ultimate moment in a concert for me. Like I want to be overwhelmed by, the product of all the pieces. I'm still, there every once in a while and I'm like, oh, it's got a telly headstock, but it seems like it's got a strap body. What guitar is that guy playing? This is weird, but I'm very interested. But yeah, like we do have very different perspectives on the world and experiences of different moments.
Yeah, that's interesting. The best concert experiences for me have been like something I can have a lot of time with. So Blu-ray, watch the same concert over and over. Even songs that are longer, I really, really identify with, like Death Cab for Cuties, I Will Possess Your Heart, or Dave Grohl's Play. Just the building lets me really understand all the complexity that's in the music while it's happening. So it is weird how we all experience music differently.
Yeah. I've not thought a lot about it in relation to the Enneagram, but if I had to on the spot, try to give a reason why that's how I experience a concert, I would say it's the intensity thing. So I am an 8, as Jake typed me earlier.
I correctly typed you is what I did.
Yeah. No, I am an 8, and 8s really like intensity in everything. And so, you'll hear the word glutton. No, I'm sorry. That's the 7. Lust. You'll hear the word lust thrown around with the 8, and that doesn't mean sexual lust. That means lust for intensity of experience. And so I think when it comes to the concert thing, that is what's happening. I am really focusing in on one piece at a time and really connecting with those pieces before it's all put together as an entire experience for me. And that's the best way I can describe it without having thought much about it.
That makes sense. For me, I think this experience of letting go is probably a source of freedom. Like, so the Enneagram, I mean, in essence, is this type system with 9 types that essentially tell us like, what is our response to our childhood environment? So for me, honestly, my favorite way to describe the types are coping addictions. For me, I addictively or compulsively would run to my head and I would start, thinking about perfect future realities and stuff like this to get away from the present moment. Music, sex, poetry, art, these types of things, they bring me back into the moment. And they say, hey, guess what? Life right here, right now is actually just as good as your head, if not better. So like letting go, feeling that music inside of me, not thinking anymore is like, that's transcendent. And I use music to get there.
It's presence, the thing that gets you away from your head.
Mm-hmm.
Novelty, presence.
Novelty is certainly a strong enough force to bring me out of all the ideas, all the possibilities in my head to be like, oh, you know what? It's actually kind of interesting right here, right now. Let's pay attention.
Yeah. So for me, it was as a 5. I don't know if you ever tried to type me in the last few minutes or not. I can't remember, but I'm a 5. Would you have been right if you tried?
I did try. I did succeed.
Nice. You're pretty good at doing what you're not supposed to do.
Thank you. You know what? Actually, just side note, I'm actually really bad at typing people. If I had to type people, all I would see is myself and everyone around me. I would say, oh, yeah, he's a 7. Oh, yeah, she's probably a 7. That's a 7.
I think
right
you
there.
did that actually when you first told me about my Enneagram type.
Well, we did.
We definitely, when you were younger, we thought you were a 7 for sure.
Sure.
But we can talk about that later. But yes, we definitely did.
Yeah. For me, it's like, I didn't know this, but as a paramedic, I sort of thrived in that work because you must act. And so when I automatically go in my head and analyze, it's just not a possibility as a paramedic. There's someone bleeding right now. There's someone delivering a child right now. There's someone who can't breathe unless I do something. It sort of forces me into action. And I don't know, the best like operating Frank in the world is action. There's action involved for me. So doing something, expressing agency or whatever, doing something. But I don't know how that would play at a concert exactly. But
can I come back to what you guys were saying just before? You asked about novelty for him, and I want to make it a distinction. Well, I want to ask about a distinction to Jake because he's the one that has this experience. But I think Jake was trying to say that being like realizing that this is happening brings him into the present, which gets him out of his head. I mean, I think that's what you said. And the novelty thing, I think, is actually the coping mechanism that a 7 uses. This is one of the coping mechanisms that a 7 uses, like to maybe avoid things or to like get away from their pain or whatever it might be. So novelty is not necessarily the thing that brings him into the present. It is more the way he's trying to not be present, I think. Is that correct or no?
Well, here's one of the ways that the 7 tricks themselves, honestly. We get bored easily. We're always in our head. Our heads are going, super fast all the time. So you actually said something that I thought was an interesting slip of language. And you said being in this moment, like in a concert, makes you realize that the present is, and it has nothing to do with realizing. It's actually, if I don't realize it, that's the best possible outcome. It is, I am just in it. Right. As opposed to realizing it. And then I start getting in my head about being in it. And it's like, oh, this is great. Later, I'm going to be thinking about how great it was. And, all of these types of thoughts. So when you realize that compulsively, what the 7 does is they plan for the future. They're thinking about what comes next constantly. It's a way of not having to be here right now. Novelty is, a way to sort of reduce the boredom, which in itself can be pain. So like, if the environment here is painful, then I go to my head and start planning for the future to get away from that. Planning for the future eventually becomes so boring that I need here to be interesting enough to cure that pain. So I introduce novelty. Now, if I do that compulsively, that can look like, let's go out drinking. Let's go drive to another state. Let's do something crazy enough to make it interesting and not boring. If I do it intentionally, it can be a planned effort that has, fruitful outcomes, and we can have a fun conversation and, have a campfire in the backyard or something. But yeah, I think that's the way I view it, is I use novelty as a way to cure the pain from the antidote to the pain.
Gotcha.
But it's also interesting that, I've always kind of hated personality type tests because I feel like they're a box. I feel like they tell you who you are. This is who you are. It's sort of preordained. You don't get to change it, that sort of thing. The Enneagram was really interesting to me when I found it. And this was like, back in 2019, we were hearing all about this. And I'm sure that it's been around for a very long time. It's actually an ancient, format for thinking about things. It's only been a personality type since like the 1970s, where they took this framework and applied it to personality. But it's been around for quite a while, but I really saw like a renaissance in the last 5 years or so. And you and I, Noah, were headed over to a Josh Ritter concert, and you were like, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but you're a 7. And you got to listen to this episode of the Sleeping at Last podcast. And it introduced it to me. And you said, all right, you're going to listen to this. Just try not to cry. And I'm not going to cry. And then like 5 minutes later, I was like, why is it so hard to keep my eyes open right now? Like, this is very difficult. So it was very clear that, yeah, okay, I'm a 7. But what the Enneagram does is it says, not this is who you are. It says these behaviors are a result of your response to your environment. You have done this. You have received the same stimulus over and over again. Your dad wasn't there, to give you attention, whatever. That was so painful for you, Jake, as a 7, that you just always were in your head, so you didn't have to experience the pain of that present thing that you didn't have that you wanted. So what you can realize then with the Enneagram is that it's not actually a box. It is a doorway out of the box that you're already in. It is saying, hey, this is the way you hide from yourself. This is the way that you have compulsively believed that this is the normal experience for you. Guess how you get out? Well, every time that you notice that you're distracting yourself, Jake, every time you realize that you're planning for the future, this is actually now a trigger to go introspectively and say, what are you avoiding? And when I started doing that, I felt like, holy shit, I'm starting to see myself. I'm starting to watch the ways that I'm compulsively avoiding all these painful things. Mm-hmm. And now I get to actually deal with those things as opposed to just, sliding them under the rug.
Yeah.
Same.
I think one of the dangers of the Enneagram is that it's really easy to make it a parlor trick and say, oh, I know about you. And there's something fun about that, with your friends or whatever, to say, to caricaturize somebody and say, this is funny because it's definitely you. And I mean, it doesn't make that not true. It is fun and funny in that way, but I also think that's damaging, because when you consistently put somebody in that box, that is where the box comes from right there. And I totally agree with what you're saying. It's a way, I think the Enneagram should be applied to yourself as a way out of the box, as you said, as opposed to applying it to other people. And I think that when you consistently put somebody in that box, it just leads to more misunderstanding. We've had a lot of conversations between the three of us recently since starting this podcast, and sort of the overarching narrative here is that we're trying to communicate better as friends and understand each other better, even though we've known each other for so long. And it's crazy how much we still learn about each other and how we perceive things and how we process things and how we communicate differently. And a lot of, I think, the problems that we have with communication is years now of putting each other in these boxes based on something that is truly insightful. I really like the Enneagram a lot. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't use it, but I think when you use it on others, it becomes very damaging.
I agree. As a sub note, I thought when you said years, you said yours. And you looked at Jake. So a lot of our problems with conversations are yours.
That's because I'm a 7.
No, I said years, but it's definitely your fault.
Yeah. I know. It's not Jake's.
I mean,
that's the problem.
That's a big breakdown in communication. I mean, if I had to, say there were 2 types of communication breakdowns at minimum, you've got the breakdown where it's like, and this is
he
the one.
He does this because he's a 7.
There are 2 types of communication breakdowns, at least. The one that we've talked about most is this idea that I can say a word and it's right out there floating in the middle of the table and we're all looking at it and it means 3 different things to 3 different people. We think we're communicating about the same thing, but really we're not. I've also experienced a situation, and I think it's the one that you just alluded to, Noah. And it is the one where the way I symbolize that word is based on who I believe said it, right? And if I thought that I was talking to Frank of 10 years ago and he said something, it would mean something very different than Frank today. He's not the same person. He's a process that's ongoing. I think a lot of communication breakdown comes from me saying, oh, I have experience with you. I know who you are. I'm choosing what you mean by what you say right now, as opposed to just being here in this moment, hearing it and knowing what, and interpreting what you mean right now.
This is one of the types?
That was 2 types. So it's sort of an extrapolation of the one. Like, we can just be having a random conversation and say, this word means different things to different people.
Oh, the Yeti cup thing or whatever. Just perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Right. Love. We all come up with something different in our minds when we say that. Then there is, Jessica, this is my ex, right? Says, I need you to do this thing. Well, I hear that from the traumatic experiences that we had 6 years ago. And I think, oh, she's trying to force me to do this or whatever, take away my freedom. This symbol is derived from who I think she is. And she's not even that person anymore.
Yeah, the tendency to see people as they were.
Yes.
Sure. Noah's had an even more recent experience of it, I think, but on Slack night.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Watching YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of fun for me, but it was also very interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, our
I don't know how much
imaginations
you
got
want to
into a
talk about
conflict
that.
with each other.
What'd you say?
I said our imaginations got into a conflict with each other.
Yeah.
It was nice.
Was it?
Ooh.
Yeah. It was ultimately fruitful, but
Well, we've had that with me as well since we started this.
sure.
I mean, there was a conversation we had, one of the earlier podcasts, where Frank described it as I had a wall up, and I was like, not in any way. And
Jake described it as that.
or okay, Jake did.
I probably said it feels like you have a wall up.
Mm-hmm. Well, but my point is just that you felt something that wasn't there from my perspective. That's all I'm saying. Not that you were right or wrong, or I was right or wrong. Simply that we perceived it differently. And you even said, we had that conversation around the fire that same night, I think. And you said, I didn't believe you.
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the weirdest things in the world, to have a relationship with you, to trust you, to be honest. I know you. I don't think you're lying.
Mm-hmm.
But there was so much cognitive dissonance between what I felt had to be true and the words that were coming out of your mouth.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes from maybe that what you were describing to Frank is that you've known me for a lot of years, and you're putting something on me that maybe you believed from my past. And so you're like, no, I know you.
Mm-hmm.
This couldn't be true. It's the whole point I'm making.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic, and I get it. I understood that. But it's still frustrating to me as the person who's like, no, I really didn't have a wall up. Everything felt great to me.
And that's one of the characteristics of the 8, right? Is this feeling of being misunderstood, like in general? Is that
Yeah,
something?
I mean, I think everybody feels misunderstood. I think 8s, I don't know, I've never been another personality type, but I think 8s in the stuff that you read about the Enneagram seem to feel it more often, but maybe that's because we are more aggressive in some ways. We're searching for that intensity. And so I think that I think the directness sometimes makes it, is off-putting for people.
So like most other personality types don't employ that level of aggression unless they're upset or...
Right. And that is, when you look at an 8, our most easily accessible emotion is anger. That doesn't mean we're angry people. It just means it's the easiest one for us to get to. So I'm pretty, I think, calm about most things, But the thing that shows up, like when I'm upset or frustrated or something, it comes up to the surface way more easily than cheerfulness or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think because that's so readily accessible to an 8, it shows more often, and it's really off-putting to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that because it's just different from how other people respond to things. This is, a guess. I don't know. But I do feel like many times in my life I've been very misunderstood in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I also understand it. I can also, after a disagreement with Frank and I butt heads a lot because I think, Frank's a pretty direct communicator. So I think sometimes we butt heads because we're both willing to say no or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so then we end up butting heads about it. And I think both of us most of the time walk away okay with it. But I can see after that conflict or whatever you want to call it, okay, I understand why he felt I was aggressive or whatever. It's not that I can't see it, but it just comes to the surface in the moment.
Yeah. I don't know what it's like to be an 8. I mean, although in some ways I do. I sort of grow in that direction. But the 8 feels, I'm trying to draw a distinction between the 5 and the 8. So for me as a 5, sort of intense connection doesn't feel important. It's not that I don't value connection, but the intensity doesn't have to be there. And for an 8, I feel like the intensity sort of matters. It's important. And
it's specifically how we feel intimacy.
Yeah. So I don't if we disagree, it's unlikely to cause a major problem for me because most of my world is like, I would prefer to do it introspectively anyways. It's not super important to me that your opinion's different. I mean, I care about you as a person, but it's not going to mess with my life.
Yeah.
So the intensity is just different for me as a 5.
Yeah. Well, it's all momentary, I think, for an 8. It's about connection. It's about feeling met in a certain place. And this all comes back all the way back to sort of that childhood wound sort of thing, the coping mechanism. We are challenging, especially with new relationships, new people. But it's no different with people I've known for 15 years either. We're challenging because there's something subconsciously that tells me if I can be prickly and abrasive and you stick around, that probably means you're good. You're not going to go anywhere. And we're terrified of abandonment.
Yeah.
And so this comes out in our behavior. It is behavior. That's why it's hard to control it. You can control it to a certain extent, but it's behavior. It's a response. And so when we're having a conversation about something that you feel I'm super intense about, I'm not even necessarily trying to win or put you in your place or cause a fight. It's more about trying to feel like you're meeting me there and understanding me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. For me, it's just that I think you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're getting objectively, it seems wrong if I'm telling you that. It seems wrong to me. I can be wrong, and I am all the time, but to me, it seems wrong. That would be the only reason I'm in a conflict.
Sure. That makes sense.
But I do sometimes chant, I don't know, through the Enneagram, I have parts of me that are 5. Those are the most automatic. I have parts that are 7 and parts that are 8. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they seem to happen automatically. When we were having Slack night, I definitely had moments where I was in 8 for
yeah. You were way more emotional than I almost ever see you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just was very sure and felt like the intensity was needed or something. I don't know. It's pretty rare for me, but
Mhm.
Well, it's interesting, like the Enneagram has this integration and disintegration line, and it's not, preordained, but it is essentially like as a 7, when I am stressed and disintegrating in my emotions, I will most often exhibit the worst traits of the 1. When I am at my best and I'm really healthy and whole and healing in that sort of energy, I go to 5, and it's more analytical, and it's, taking my time. You, as an 8, you're going to go to 2, which is like this caregiver in health, and you're going to disintegrate toward that overthinking quality of the 5. And then Frank, as a 5, you would disintegrate toward like, I'm the 7, where it's like, I'm
Right.
going to, go toward novelty and try not to think about all the stuff in life that hurts. But as an 8, you were just talking about Frank at his best is acting in the world. And it's like, when that comes up out of you, it inspires action.
sure.
And I definitely saw that that night as well. But I also like this idea that, exploring the idea of the Enneagram not as a box, but as a doorway. We do have these direct connections, but there are aspects of all of this in us. And as I have sat with that discomfort as opposed to trying to cover it up with future planning and all this stuff, I see a lot of aspects of a lot of the Enneagram types, but even of the 7. Like, in essence, I had this coping addiction, and it was to always be happy. That's sort of what the 7 is known as. They call it Peter Pan or whatever. So even whenever everything hurts, I'm smiling, I'm looking at the silver lining. It's compulsive. One of the times that I remember Noah being a dick, it actually was, that's the way it felt anyway. It was, he said, "Oh, Jake's happy, so he must be avoiding something." Made me so mad. Right?
Yeah. I said that as an 8.
Yeah. It made me
Okay.
so mad because I went like, okay, well, I'm smiling, but so I guess that's evidence of me avoiding.
Mm.
What would be evidence of me being happy? Like,
Yeah,
wouldn't it be
well-
the same?
2 things. 1, you're right for being mad about that.
Sure.
2, it was mostly a joke, and I was barbing you, but also this is exactly what I was saying at the beginning of this, which is, when we put other people in the box that is their number, it's just damaging because it makes you think these things like, okay, well, I was just being happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to turn that around. You remember the other day when I said murder could be a good thing? This is the same thing, just like a blender. Basically, after that happened, I actually got really curious about this. I was like, okay, so how do I know? And I've heard this before with a friend that had an eating disorder, and they were like trying to overcome this eating disorder, and they didn't know when they were legitimately hungry or when they were eating to avoid something, some uncomfortable feeling. And that was like a legitimate thing, but eating is as important as breathing. Like, this is something we have to do. Well, being happy is an essential part of being human. So I like really went inside after that. And I went, okay, how do I know that I'm not avoiding? How do I know that I'm actually happy? So for me, something that's been kind of beneficial is thinking about this difference between compulsivity and intentionality.
Mm.
This sort of spectrum where it's like, no, I legitimately am happy. This is not avoidant behavior, but it definitely takes a level of introspection. And for me at this point, it's like noticing I'm happy being a trigger for that introspection.
Can I make one clarification on the statement that I would make that would piss you off?
Yeah.
I think that I said, if Jake says he's happy, because there are times, and I don't mean to keep this going, but there are times that you'd be like, "Oh no, I'm great, I'm happy." You'll say it,
Yeah.
and it was more about like when you say it, when you're adamant about it, then maybe you're not.
I gotcha.
I'm not saying that I should say it.
It has
but-
like Quagmire from Family Guy vibes.
Yeah.
You know that guy?
I do not.
Oh, really? All right.
But there's
carry
a
on.
difference, like to me as your friend who's known you for a long time, there's a difference between seeing you be happy and
Yeah.
you being like, oh, I'm happy. No, everything's great. I'm happy.
Yeah.
That's really what it doesn't mean I should say it, but that's really what I meant.
I totally get it. I remember that day specifically, though. It was like one of the first, well, it was around this time of year. It was one of the first nice days.
Mm.
We had just gone through an Illinois winter, which, is absolutely depressing. And then right about this time of the year, it starts to get warm. I'm wearing shorts for the first time. Sun's out. It's beautiful sunset. I was just walking through, and I was just like, man, it is gorgeous. And it's usually about this time every year that I realize, man, I really haven't smiled for like 3 months. Maybe I should move somewhere with more sunshine.
I don't know. That's a great question. So I think what Noah was saying is when you channel Quagmire from Family Guy,
Mm-hmm.
that what's the rest?
What I said was nothing about Quagmire, but
It's when you say out loud how happy you are in a way that channels Quagmire. That's my subtext I'm adding.
Yeah, to clarify, I'm sorry that I do that sometimes. And I'm not saying that I should do it, but it is funny. There is something funny about it.
I agree. Like, this is not me bringing up like hurt feelings or anything. This is me being like, this really hurt me when it happened and I couldn't figure it out. But ultimately it led me to a place where now I know myself better than I did before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was the whole point of bringing it up.
But to answer Frank's question, yes, it is more about there's a difference. We can tell a difference between when you're just happy, present, if you will, and a time where you're trying to convince yourself that you're happy.
Well, that was, yeah. And I totally get that. That was a weird time for me though, because I was in a kind of fragile place in my life. I was legitimately happy. And you said that. And like I said, it did hurt me at that time, but it was mostly because I was so unaware of who I was as a person that I used the people around me as a mirror to help me know who I was and what I was feeling. So that's how estranged from my emotions I was. So when I felt happy and you said that, I legitimately questioned whether or not I was happy. And then I questioned whether or not I could know I was happy.
And this highlights the problem. You are a process.
Mm-hmm.
You were happy and it's different from the past. And so I was putting the past on you.
Well, it's interesting just for the sake of throwing this out there, that does feel like a little bit of a misunderstanding. I do have that guy, and that guy isn't necessarily genuine. He's not a reflection of my feeling state at that moment. He is a reflection of my anticipated fun for that moment. Like, I've got an idea in my head and I want to increase the energy, and usually it works. I can get that going. It's not genuine. It's not genuine happiness by any means. But I think there's an even greater distinction. There's also Jake when he's happy, and there's Jake when he has no idea what he's feeling, so he says he's happy. And that's what I think Noah was talking about.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think I understand what Frank's saying about, I don't know Quagmire. I don't watch Family Guy. I don't think I've ever watched Family Guy. But when you do say that you're happy,
you can hear the difference.
It has the vibe.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's a mask I've worn my entire life. So I'm well acquainted with it.
As someone who observes your life, like if I just saw you on the street doing that, I'd be like, oh, I guess high energy.
Mm-hmm.
But when I see you going through some horrific thing, giggity, it's like, I don't know if he's in touch with the reality right now, but maybe you are.
I totally get it. I mean, again, I'm not just kind of live like 15 layers deep here, but I think what the Enneagram does is it makes you realize you're wearing a mask, and that you've probably for your entire life believed you were the mask. And when you realize that you're not, you get to take it off and be the person underneath. That's pretty cool. There's also this other thing, and that's that, we still are a 5, an 8, and a 7. There is still like this default state where it's not trauma response. It's just like base personality too. Mm-hmm. So I do have this aspect to me that is the silver lining aspect. And when I am going through the worst moment of my life, I go, well, this is novel. And that could be an avoidant response. Or, what I've come to realize is, no, that's legitimately my perspective. This hurts like hell. I hope it's worth it. Like, at least it's interesting.
I think that's important. You can access healthy parts of all of your integration line, disintegration line. You can access unhealthy parts of your integration line, for instance. These things are all possible because the Enneagram just makes up an entire person. We are all of these numbers in some form or fashion. We have particular behaviors that we default to, which is why the typing works. But as an example here is, I go to 5 in disintegration and I know those moments. And luckily I haven't had them in quite a while, but when I am searching for information, it's obsessive or compulsive. You know something's going on. And this is exactly what Jake was alluding to earlier, is that it acts as this mirror and you're able to go, oh, okay, something's going on. I need to figure out what it is. But I'm also able to access that 5 in a very healthy way. And I do regularly, where I go, okay, I know how to consume information. I know how to make sense of it. And I can do it for productivity is how it happens for me.
I just realized something in hearing you talk about this, which is, so as a 5, I tend to want to understand and analyze everything. Mm-hmm. And in this podcast, getting audio equipment, figuring out the best solution, I'm in a very action-oriented center currently about this whole endeavor. And so I think some of my resistance to the let's see how this goes, do this, analyze it, is in that it's a long process, and I think we should do more than anything to do with any other reasons. Mm-hmm. So does that make any sense?
Makes a little sense.
I got lost about 3/4 of the way through.
Okay. We could probably do this after the recording, but
sure,
we should close.
Yeah, you don't want to admit that you've been trying to find the best audio solution.
What do you mean?
I'm just saying.
Oh, right. No. We acknowledge the audio sucks. It still sucks, but hang on, I have a clip for this. There are better Unbecoming Platypus podcasts ahead.
I see what you're saying. This is an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus.
Oh, you've never heard any of these?
No, that's why I've been confused the whole time.
Down here at the bottom, there's this thing that says preview or live, and it's on preview. I'm going to switch it to live. You're listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. In these episodes, we're learning. We don't know what we're doing yet, and sometimes it shows. We think there's beauty in being a beginner, and we're learning from them, so we publish them. So thanks for listening, and rest assured that there will be better Unbecoming Platypus podcasts ahead.
That was helpful.
That's just a note about the audio quality.
Oh, yeah. Well, and other quality.
And all aspects of this thing you're hearing.
We suck, but we'll be better. We appreciate you.
Sounds fun.
How do you want to wrap it up?
Jake, sing us out. Down.
I thought you wanted to wrap us up with talking about your mind and your tools and making friends.
I can't imagine why you think that. We don't stick to an agenda around here. I do think that, though, for what it's worth. I think that you can live your life believing you are the mask, or you can sort of take it off and find yourself. You know, for me, this is the hero's journey that you see in mythology. This is the way that I like to think about it. It is a series of tests and revelations and transformations. And I think that's the way I see myself. Maybe that's why it appears that I'm uncommitted to a certain idea or concept. It's because it's always changing. And I don't want to hold to something too rigidly, even who I think I am.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm good at analysis. I've also been doing it for many, many years. And so the chances that I don't have enough information to function in the world are low. So I should just probably go function. And then if I need to do some analysis, I'll hop back into that well-worn path in my mind. But
I like that. No, you were talking about that at work the other day, like this idea of kind of educating people on what they need to do and letting go and just trusting that they're going to take care of it.
Yeah. You know, it's true. One of the things, an 8 doesn't like to be controlled. It's not about having control necessarily, but what ends up happening, and I've experienced this a lot in a work setting in particular, is that I have a hard time trusting other people to do things properly. And so what that looks like sometimes is that I want to control everything. I end up doing too much. Maybe it doesn't even look like I'm trying to control things. It just looks like me doing way too much. Mm-hmm. And it's not because I want to do it all. It's because I just have this trust issue. So, yeah, I've been trying to, instead of take different things and run with it myself, I've been trying to educate so other people can do it and then let go of those things so I don't have to take that responsibility on myself. And it's difficult, but I think I'm getting there slowly.
Yeah, it sounds like we may be becoming platypuses after all.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
See you next time.
On
Bye. The Unbecoming
Platypus.
Hey, it's Frank again. Thanks for listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. You can also check us out online at theunbecomingplatypus.com. We hope these conversations inspire you to improve your communication skills and deepen your connections with your own friends and loved ones. Until next time, this has been the Unbecoming Platypus podcast.